Something that happened this week, which has really shaken us, is the story of a 5-year-old boy who suffered horrific injuries to his hand at the hands of his stepmother. Now, doctors at the Cape Coast Regional Hospital have successfully amputated the left arm of this 5-year-old boy after his maltreatment at the hands of his stepmother. The suspect, Ifwa Abidwa, was arraigned before the District Magistrate Court of Abradunkwa Mankese on a provisional charge of causing harm, and of course he's been remanded into prison custody until February 14. Also arrested in connection with this was the father of the victim, David Mensah, 36 years old, and he's also been remanded into prison custody to reappear on the same date. Now, he's been provisionally charged with the offense of abetment of crime. But how does a child who has been molested, get help? What support can be given him or her? How about parents who mete out punishment of this nature? What sort of legal respite is there for the victims? We have a lot to talk about, but before that, here's a quick wrap of this story from the man who brought it all to us, Richard JoyNews.
We are here at the recovery ward at the Cape Coast Teaching Hospital, where Isaac, the 5-year-old boy, got his left hand amputated. Doctors say they've been highly successful with the operation. The hand, right to the elbow, was affected in this operation. Now, this is how it all started. Isaac, a KG2 pupil, is said to have defecated on the floor. His stepmom, Ifwa Abidwa, protested and, as a way of punishing him, attacked him with a machete. Isaac's left hand was eventually cut, but the stepmom refused to care for him. The hand started decomposing. Two good Samaritans saw him in a terrible state while he was accompanying his stepmom to the farm in his current condition. Isaac was eventually brought to the Cape Coast Teaching Hospital, but doctors here needed the consent of the parent for his arm to be amputated. Ifwa Abidwa, his stepmom, was arrested, wrote her statement with the police admitting she caused the harm to the boy. The father of the boy on Tuesday surfaced at the hospital to sign the consent form. He did indeed sign, but was picked up by the police shortly thereafter. The hand was amputated in the early hours of Wednesday. Isaac now lays here innocently, sleeping the pains away. He is now awake and attempts to lift his hand for the first time after the surgery. We have been speaking with the medical social worker here at the Cape Coast Teaching Hospital, Felicia Tete, and she is asking for support, financial support, because the boy needs to get back to school, and at least if the general public would help in getting the boy some prosthetic hands, it will be in order.
Just a sad story, but we are still liaising with our district social worker officers to solicit for funds so that philanthropists can come in, because we are still soliciting for funds. As for the mother, we don't even know the whereabouts, so we still need support from philanthropists so that we can all come together as a team and support this child financially. Financially, social welfare, we are handicapped. We don't have money for that, but we are trying our best. So we are pleading with the public that if God touches their heart and they want to support this child, their hands are open. And our doors are open to welcome them.
What kind of support beyond the financial support would you play, or would you require that these children, the child is taken?
We will liaise with the district social worker to contact any of the relatives. First, we make sure the child will be enrolled into school. After this thing has been settled, then we'll see how best financially we can assist. We have policies that we can use to support this child. So we are still, but all we need is a distant relative that will entrust the child into his care for now. Then we see the child is okay, then we will see the way forward.
I have been speaking with the district police commander, DSP Paula Konde. He confirms that the two, the father of the child and then the stepmom of the child, are still in their custody. Richard JoyNews, Cape Coast.
So that's how it all unfolded, but it's time for us to have a bit more of a conversation about it, isn't it, Mama V?
Yes, we have been joined by Dr. Emmanuel Sowa. He's a clinical psychologist, medical superintendent, the VRA hospital here in Accra. Thank you so much for making it.
You're welcome.
You were sharing some thoughts whilst the story was rolling. What should have happened in this case? What should be happening?
Personally, I believe that the worst part is over, because what will happen has happened already. But as a nation, I think we need to do some introspection, ask ourselves how all this arose. Why would a 22-year-old woman do that to a 5-year-old? Why would a 22-year-old woman, in psychology we say that the brain does not finish developing till you are 25. And the last to develop are your things like empathy.
Okay.
Things like your capacity to predict the consequences of your actions, your capacity to plan. So if at that age somebody is still growing, and people can go beyond mid-20s, still not matured, and at 22 you're already married, you already have one child, you're already pregnant.
And you have a stepchild as well.
And you have a stepchild as well. Then you can imagine how much pressure is on such a woman. And it is not surprising at all that she has carried out such an atrocity. I'm not justifying it. I mean, there are people who become armed robbers. You all have to be protected from people like that. But what I'm trying to say is that society needs to be more protective of the vulnerable. The moment somebody gets pregnant, they are vulnerable. Pregnancy on its own can cause all sorts of emotional difficulties. And that is where a lot of our problems begin. So if you're in pregnancy, you're having issues. You give birth to the baby, there are still issues. The relationship with your baby is very disturbing. There is no love, there is no holding, there is no care, neglect happening. That baby is going to have difficulties relating to other people. So it's what we sow into people that they manifest later in life. A child cannot show love when it has not received love. And we grow up like that. And it's difficult for you to get along with people. So this child really needs a lot of support.
Okay, who are you calling child? Is it the 5-year-old?
No, it's 23, she's an adult. But for me, she's an adolescent. Okay, but I'm talking about a baby.
Okay.
The 5-year-old really needs help. Because before you can get to the point where this is done to you, it means you would have suffered a lot of other things that have a serious impact on your personality. Children don't understand anything. When you hit a child really hard, the child thinks you want to kill it. And that's how much the physiology of the child reacts to what you're doing to them. So all the happenings that have occurred in the house have already had an impact on the baby. And for that child to suffer this and then be amputated, to find himself in a completely new environment where everybody is all over him, it is very, very significant, and it's going to have a long-lasting impact on the child.
Now, I want us to spend most of our time talking about the child. The child obviously is the biggest victim here, but let's clear up one issue before we move on. We've talked about the fact that pregnancy in itself has such a massive impact on the psyche of a woman, and I'm sure many of the women watching us will understand what we're talking about, the hormones and all of that going on. There's a 22-year-old, you've talked about the stage she is in her mental development. She's now pregnant. She has another child for whom she's responsible. She has this 5-year-old with whom she has this fraught relationship, and now she's in police custody, in prison. Tell me what that will probably be doing to her state of mind.
Pregnancy on its own, as I said, has emotional consequences. And those who suffer more would be those who already are vulnerable. So those who are psychologically stable and are thriving will suffer less. But those who already have issues will suffer more. So for a woman like this with all this pressure on her, add this to police custody and all the accusations, she's going to have a lot of anxiety. She's going to get depressed. And she's going to feel very responsible. She's responsible, but for me, I think we are all responsible for neglecting the vulnerable, for thinking that a 22-year-old can have the freedom to do whatever they like and there is no support for them. So she's going to go through a lot of emotional trouble that will have an impact on the developing fetal brain. The brain of the baby inside there is going to be impacted by all this. You're probably going to give birth to a baby that is very disturbed and maybe a crybaby, difficult to soothe. And if you yourself are not happy, how are you going to manage such a baby? You're going to be bashing the baby, I'm tired, sleep, this, that, and the problem continues.
Yeah. So I guess the point here is, I mean, much as we're expressing concern about the woman's state of mind, if it goes wrong, the real victims again will be her children.
Yeah.
So back to the children.
Yeah.
And this 5-year-old, Mama B, when we first heard this story, you remember, I mean, we were aghast. So this is a 5-year-old boy who has, first of all, been abandoned by his own mother. Now, I use the term abandoned loosely, but his own mother is not in his life. She lives in another part of the country. The father is a worker who is often not at home. So he is being raised by somebody who is not a biological relative. Now, this person has issues of her own, and he has become the victim of these issues. So he's suffered neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and now he finds himself the victim of a massive knife wound which has resulted in amputation. This boy will now have to adapt to growing up with children who look different from him. Tell me what's going on in his mind.
Children at that age have a lot of difficulty even expressing how they feel because they don't have the language to be able to express it. And a lot of them will end up even blaming themselves for what is happening to them. The child is going to go through a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, which can be very crippling, you know. And growing up, as you said, interacting with other children don't understand these things. They'll make fun of you and do all sorts of things to you. The child may become aggressive, you know, find himself always fighting, have difficult relationship with his peers and with, you know, teachers and others. And that is going to have an effect on his ability to learn. Academically, even when you grow up, how do you cope with stuff at work? Living with other people, it's not going to be easy. So the important thing now is that that child needs support, which I don't believe that the parents are in any position to provide. And that is where the problem is, that as a society, there is nothing to fall back to. There's nothing to fall back to. I mean, who are you going to give? You cannot take the child to a home. It's worse there. Home. You know, I'm talking about a children's home. The situation is not ideal. So you need somebody who is trained to show love to this child, to bring the child up as his own. Because the problems that have arisen in the life of this child as a result of the neglect and abuse that he has suffered can only be undone through relationship, because it is relationship that give rise to the problem. So you need the opposite of that to cure the problem, and it must be persistent and rigorous.
We're joined by Bright Appiah from Child Rights International, and has been doing a lot of work in this area across the country. Bright, good morning. Thanks for your time with us. So this is a child in Abra Asebu Kwamankese. Suffered this violence and now is an amputee. Tell me, what support is available through the government of Ghana to help this child through the process that DOC prescribes for him?
Yeah, well, I'm sure Doc mentioned a few things, so I will not go into those. But I will just look at the structures that we have to deal with some of these issues, some of the services that you have to provide in an event like this. Generally, when things happen like this, the child ceases to be, in quote, a property of the parent. They do not have any authority over him anymore. The state assumes that responsibility. That is what the law says that we should do. And what the law has done is to prescribe a certain people to take up that responsibility. First of all, it looks at fit persons. They call them fit persons, people who are in a position to provide the kind of services that a child needs. And then also, in terms of the financial support, it's supposed to be provided by the district assembly in events like this, and social welfare must facilitate that. So you realize that what has happened, service providers must also, by now, we should have them being active, even at the time of doing the amputation and then providing the needed support.
When you say service providers, what are you talking about? Would that include social welfare? Yeah, because we know the state of our social welfare.
Exactly. But in terms of the structures that we have, we cannot say some of these issues neglecting social welfare, whether they are doing their work or not. But I think that some of these things also should let us put them on their toes to do what they are supposed to do. And the most important thing is that the assembly must take up this responsibility in terms of the medical bills and anything that concerns the child. Become the state decision now. So we expect that they will take all these things into consideration and do what they are supposed to do. And in providing the services, they should have to look at all aspects of the case. The child lives in an environment, belongs to a family, for which their negligence resulted into this. So it means that the whole society in which the child lives is ill, is malfunctional in terms of the service that they have to provide. So the decision of the state is not, in my opinion, should not be that they have to return the child back to that environment.
But that appears to be happening here, because we understand that on the day of the arrest of the parents, the grandmother of this child was the one placed in responsible position over the child. This is the grandmother who lives in the same house where this child has been abused all this time. She was there when the child was asked to sleep outside because his hand was rotting and was emitting a bad smell. She was there. And now she's the person being placed as a responsible adult over the child. So there's already a failure of what you are prescribing here.
Of course, sometimes the way social welfare does their things, I don't know who committed the child into the hands of the grandmother though, but there are a lot of things that would also go into that. One, for the law, you cannot just take a child out of the natural environment unless you examine the natural environment and come to the conclusion that there's nobody in that natural environment that can provide the services that the state will do. So the state commit somebody. So in this case, we would describe the grandmother as a fit person if she has all the necessary characters to provide the service. So that is the kind of examination that they have to do. So if they've done that, the assumption is that they've done all these examinations and came to the conclusion that the woman can do it. And if they do not do that, and the woman also lives in that environment, then in my case, I don't think that the woman is fit to even take care of the child. And I've always raised the argument that when they arrested the woman, they did not arrest the man. So we send a strong signal that they have to pick, we even propose that they have to pick every single person in that household, because they witnessed whatever went on there, so that they are suspect in this case and all. So now that if they've picked somebody from the same household, I think that it is a wrong decision, and they have to also look back and see what they can do. And if there is any other person in the family who can provide that services, then the state must commit the child into the hands of the person. And the commitment is not because she's a grandmother. The state do not look at it from that angle. It looks at it from the angle that you can provide the needed support that the child needs at that time. So if they don't have all these things, I don't think that we should. But we are still doing our investigations. We've done a lot of work in that area. And we are still
doing with this specific matter?
Yes, with this specific matter. Our people are on the ground assessing the whole situation. And unfortunately, if you look at how the whole arrest and all things were done, I don't know what went into it, but still, I think that social welfare must do a lot of work to understand the issue itself properly before they recommend any kind of treatment that they want to give to the child and even the family.
Doc was telling us about the effect that this arrest will have on the mother who's pregnant and also a nursing mother at the same time. So clearly we have 2 more child victims.
You see, it makes it complex. It makes it a bit complex because in this case, the woman has committed offense and the law must deal with her. But this is the person who is also pregnant. And the right of the child in the womb is also a priority to the state. So in that instance, what do? You know, so there's a lot of investigation that must go into it. The preliminary ones that we have also point to the fact that the man is not living up to the responsibilities at home. And as a pregnant woman, there are a lot of things that goes to their minds when they are at that stage. I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I'm sure Doc will speak to that. You know, so their makeup changes and there are a lot of things that goes into it. And I think that a lot of people have neglected their responsibility for the woman and then even the child. So certain things, you know, when they get to a certain level, certain things happen. And I wouldn't say that that is right, but we think that something gave effect to the thing that has happened. And a full-blown investigation must go into it before we will know what to do and how to even approach it and all that. So I would even use this platform to say that they have to safeguard the welfare of the woman for the sake of the child in terms of the handling of the woman and how the judicial process would also handle the case. And even if there is any punishment that needs to be given to the woman, then it has to be a punishment that will take effect after the woman has delivered. In our laws, we cannot even put a pregnant woman into prison, no matter what. But there are instances that we witnessed that. But this should also be a test case for the court and the judicial system to examine it to see what kind of things that will go on. And even the process, she's going through a lot. You know, for her to be arrested, put on television. It's sometimes I feel that we want to do good, but sometimes we should exercise some kind of discretion in terms of how we put some of these issues. So when we got to know that the woman was pregnant, you know, initially we started with aggressive way of handling the issue, but when we got to know that the woman is pregnant, we decided that no, we have to step back and do further work before we make any recommendations. So I think that they have to also take the welfare of the woman into consideration for the sake of the child in the womb.
I think that a child advocacy group should not be the one fighting for the interests of the pregnant woman. It's the responsibility of social welfare.
Yeah, exactly.
They immediately have to step in and say that you cannot do this to a pregnant woman. It is not their responsibility. So I think that there is a lot of failures along the way. And you can imagine the number of families that are living in this kind of situation. You know, we have abuse, but the commonest problem you have is neglect.
Indeed.
And its impact can be even worse than abuse, where the child is left on its own. And it has far-reaching consequences. So it's good the work they have done, and as I said, the grandmother has to be investigated to how come she was there, what effort did she make, and all that. Because the 22-year-old is in another family. The husband is not providing for his own stepson.
Exactly.
And as a 22, you have to look after somebody's child. The person is not giving you enough money. I mean,
this is a real test case of how our system is failing.
There's a lot more that we can do with this subject. The mode of punishment, that will be for another day. We'll discuss it, but we'll be following through, Mr. Bright-Appiah, with your investigations and the findings, and then subsequently the recommendations that you come up to. But thank you very much for your time, gentlemen.
You are welcome.
Dr. Emmanuel Soa, thanks for being here, and Mr. Bright-Appiah, thank you as well. There's some breaking news coming from the ongoing by-election. Stay with us, we'll bring you more.